Hi, in this video I'm going to introduce you to the if statement and to the UML activity diagram. By default, Java statements are executed in the order written. This is called sequential execution. Let's look at a code segment. I create a variable input of type scanner. I initialize it with a scanner that reads information from the keyboard. I prompt the user to enter some age. I read the number provided by the user and save it in my variable. And then I print the age that the user provided. This is a corresponding activity diagram. It shows the actions that are taken and the order in which those actions are taken. We start at the background disk and proceed from one action to the next, like first action, create scanner instance, next action, prompt user to enter age, read in a value for age, and then print age. The end looks similar to the beginning, but there's an extra ring around the black disk. At this point, each of my actions corresponds one-to-one to one of my code statements. This is typically not the case. More often, you see actions that correspond to a number of code statements. Like here, I might say read in age, and I assume that it is clear that we need a scanner, that we need a prompt, and that we need to read the actual integer. Now here, my next one, print age, corresponds to one statement. You can see there's some flexibility. How much detail we provide depends on the situation. My guideline is keep it simple, provide detail where it is needed. Both activity diagrams and of course my code are sequential. We have one activity after the other, we have one code statement after the other. But sometimes we want to execute a statement that is not the next one listed in the code. Java provides a number of control statements for such situations. There are two main categories of control statements: selection statements and repetition statements. Selection statements allow us to make a choice and take one path or another, or maybe one of multiple paths. Repetition statements allow us to do something over and over again. For now, we're going to focus on the selection statements and in particular on the simple if statement. It's sometimes also called the if single selection statement. It always starts with the keyword if followed by a condition. The condition is something that is either true or false. And then it has a code block. Could also be a single code statement, and this code is executed if and only if the condition is true. Let's look at an example. I could say if number is greater 0, print this number is positive. So let's assume my number is 4. 4 is greater 0, that is true, and then I print 4 is positive. Or let's say my number is -2. -2 greater 0, this is false. So we skip and continue afterwards. Let's have a look at another code segment. Once again, I'm using a scanner. I have a prompt, this time a prompt for the height, and I read in the height from the user. But now I have an if statement. I check, is the height greater or equal 50? If and only if that is the case, I print welcome, because in order to ride a roller coaster, you have to be at least 50 inches. And then I move on to the next customer. So you can see we start with sequential execution, creating a scanner, prompting the user, reading in the number, and now we hit the if statement. Now we make a decision, we check. What value did the user provide? Let's say the user said 45 inches, and we say is 45 greater or equal 50? No, it's not. We have to skip, and we continue at the next print statement, which says next please. So we're moving on to the next customer. This is how the corresponding activity diagram looks like. I'm starting at the black disk. My first action corresponds to the first 3 code statements, reading in the height from the user, and now I hit my if statement. I have to make a decision. In the Java code, I just say if with my condition right here. In my UML diagram, I have a diamond. This is a decision symbol, and there are 2 different paths. Now my path splits up in 2 branches. I can either take this path for height greater equal 50, or the other path for height is less than 50. Notice we have guard conditions. They have rectangular brackets, and it's the same condition that you also find here in the if condition. And only if that is the case, I want to execute my print statement. So here is the statement that is executed only if the height is greater equal 50, otherwise it is skipped. And if you follow along the arrows, you notice we always land at the second diamond, which is the merge symbol. Decision, merge look the same. Both are diamonds, but in a decision I have 1 arrow that enters and multiple arrows that leave. Here I have multiple arrows that enter and only 1 that leaves. And now my if statement is completed, and we move on in sequential order again with the next statements. In this case it's only 1. It's my print statement, and I just ask for the next customer here. Let's have a quick look at the activity diagram that we just introduced. It's part of UML, which stands for Unified Modeling Language, and it allows us to graphically represent the actions that are taken and to show the order in which those actions are taken. Here is an activity diagram for sequential statements, 1 action after the other, and here is an activity diagram for single selection statements where I split up in 2 different paths that are merging again. There's always a start, a number of actions that are performed. In case of my single selection statement, I make a decision whether it should be performed, yes or no. Afterwards we merge, and eventually we reach an end. The last thing I want to show you is a checklist that can be helpful when the syntax for if statements is still new. Let's start with an example. If age is 16, print ready to drive. I want to point out the equality operator consists of 2 characters. It looks like equals equals. It must not be confused with the assignment operator. Now that being said, let's go to the checklist. Number 1, make sure the condition is surrounded by parentheses. We have done this. Check. Number 2, make sure the condition is followed by a block of code or a single statement. We have a block of code. Check. Number 3, make sure there is no semicolon after the parentheses. This is important because my if statement is not completed yet. We still want to make sure there is the option to execute some statements. No semicolon here. Check. My last point on the checklist, if you test for equality, make sure you use 2 characters and make sure it doesn't get confused with the assignment operator. We have 2 characters here. Check.